Okay, I am trying a slightly different way to stream from Ecamm Live today. Normally, I have to go and like set up a whole stream in YouTube ahead of time, but this time I'm just trying to do it by hitting their like go live button and having it do like an unscheduled stream. So hopefully it's working as expected. It took me a minute to find where the link was, but yeah, let's see how it goes. So let me know if anything looks weird or isn't working the way that you expect, or if the quality is bad or anything like that. But hopefully everything is just going to be fine. And yeah, I'll be watching the chat a little bit and we can kind of get going here. So yeah, just let me know if everything is working as expected. Ecamm Live is making all sorts of weird noises when everyone types a chat message and stuff, which I can't figure out how to disable, but whatever, we'll get through it. Okay, so what I wanted to do today is create a couple new plugins for Tailwind, kind of core plugins that add the ability to sort of add space in between elements in a list, as well as borders in between elements in a list. Someone's saying the quality doesn't seem as good. Hopefully that's resolvable. Why does Ecamm Live constantly make like dinging sounds every time someone does anything? I wonder if I can like turn that off somehow. Sorry. Figuring this out as we go. Sound effects. All right. Hopefully we'll be okay here. All right. The popping sound? What type of popping sound? Was it like a little notification popping sound? That was every time someone comments, there was like a little thing happening. Hopefully that goes away. Anyways, let's just get to work. So the way that I get started with these usually is maybe the best way to explain it is to sort of walk you through a little bit of what the architecture of Tailwind looks like. So inside the source directory, we have this plugins directory, and this is where all the different built-in plugins are that have all of the different rules that we add. So for example, what's a simple one? Like order. This is the plugin for generating all the utilities that you see in Tailwind, like div class equals, order 2, order 3 for Flexbox sort of thing. So what this does at the end of the day, this is just written exactly like a regular Tailwind plugin, the sort of plugin that you might write yourself, like in a third-party plugin. So it's just a function. It receives some stuff that we can use to kind of register what we want to do with Tailwind. So we can register. We have this add utilities plugin for registering the utilities. This lets us escape values to make sure that they're valid CSS. This lets us access the theme. This lets us access the configured variants. And then I just do like some Lodash junk to kind of generate the JSON or the JavaScript object structure, and then I register those with Tailwind. So we're just going to write a new plugin that does that here. So first, I'm going to start by writing a test for it. Historically, I've not really written tests for the individual plugins because we have this like big test that tests the entire output of Tailwind to make sure it's correct. But I think it'll be fun to just put together a little example test anyways. So let's create a new file. There's two plugins that I'm going to make. One for the space between and one for dividers between. Historically, in my own projects, I've called the spacing one like space x4 or like space y2. But this name is kind of weird because there's already a key in Tailwind called spacing, and that could very easily kind of get confused with a new key called space. So I was looking at some other things, and a really common name for what we're doing here is like a stack component. So I think I'm going to call this like stack, and we can say stack x4, stack y2, that sort of thing. And this will just, the word space won't really be in there, but people will just learn it and they'll figure it out. And then if people are like searching Tailwind for stack, now that this terminology is becoming more popular, it'll be easy for them to sort of discover this. So I think we're going to go with that. So let's create a new file. We'll call it stack.test.js. And let's look at like, yeah, we'll just say test generating stack utilities. So there's a couple kind of helpers that we need. We need to pull in invoke plugin, it's called. Will it autocomplete? I wish this would auto import. There we go. So we need invoke plugin, and then we need to actually pull in the plugin, which doesn't exist yet. So we'll import plugin from, I guess we're going to go like dot up to tests, and then up to source, and then we'll go source plugins, and we'll call this stack. So that file doesn't exist, but that's not a big deal. And let me look. I have a PR open for another plugin that I wrote, where I created a little bit of tooling for myself to make it a little bit easier to write some of these tests. So I kind of want to show you what this test looks like for both our benefits, so I can remember sort of the structure of this. So this is kind of what this test looked like. So basically we're going to create the config that we want to run the plugin against. Then we're going to invoke the plugin passing through the config, and this will tell us what the plugin is trying to do, and then we can make some assertions about it. So we'll just do it this way. Okay, so let's say we'll make a config. We're probably going to want to end up renaming some of these tests and stuff if we need to write multiple, but I always try to start with a very generic test name to just kind of let me drive out the happy path first, and then once I start adding extra tests if we need them, it becomes more clear what this test should be called. So I'm going to have a stack config here, and maybe we'll say like 1 will be 1 pixel, 2 will be 2 pixels, 4 will be 4 pixels, and 8 will be 8 pixels. And then for the variance, we'll add maybe just like responsive. So then basically we want to verify that we get a structure like this out. And as long as we generate a valid structure here, Tailwind is going to kind of take care of the rest for us. So in this case, we're going to say const utilities equals invoke plugin. We have to execute the plugin that we're going to write, which we haven't written yet. And then we're going to pass through the config. And then we want to expect utilities to equal, and then we can just kind of write the utilities that we're expecting to get here. So I think we're gonna get like dot stack x1 is gonna be, actually we're gonna use like the owl selector here. That's how this is gonna be implemented. So this is gonna have a margin left of 1 pixel. And what order is these going to be generated in? I think probably we'll get all the X ones first, and then the Y ones after that. I have to remember how our helpers generate the order of things. The order doesn't really matter, and it actually might not even matter for verifying that the tests pass either. So this will become margin top. And yeah, okay, so this is actually supposed to be an array that has an array. These are like kind of pairs, the utilities that get added. So it's like a tuple that has the utilities and then the variance. So this is where we're going to move this stuff. And then we're going to have just responsive here. And this has got to go. All right, so we should be able to run this test and see that we get an error probably because we can't find the stack plugin. So let's go and create a stack plugin. Plugins, stack.js. And if you look at some of the more recent plugins, I wrote this little helper that makes it really easy for me to generate some of these things. It's kind of confusing syntax because it's just meant to be this really light internal thing. But basically what it's saying is the first argument is the key that we're going to look for in the theme. And then there's an array of what to generate based on that key. So this is sort of like the prefix for the actual utility name. And then these are the properties that are going to get set to the value that comes from the plugin. So I'll show you what we're going to do here. We're basically just going to copy this. And we're just going to say we want to make a plugin that reads from the stack key. And actually, you know what? This actually isn't going to work because this is a complicated plugin. That's okay. We'll kind of do it by hand. So let's look at like the order plugin, for example. We could probably start with this as a starting point. So we'll bring in Lodash because we just will. And what we're going to do is, even maybe this is weird. Let's look at border width, because border width is another example that has like top, left, bottom, right sort of thing. So this is actually closer to what we want. So I'm just going to copy this one and use this as a starting point. This is how I write all this stuff. I've basically written all this code once, and then I'm just making the changes that I need based on, what I need to do here. So this is going to be a little bit different. We don't need to do the default stuff. Maybe there's actually even like a simpler one. Padding? Yeah, padding is closer, actually. So we have all these like generators for like the different sides. So this is generating padding on all sides. Then it does the X and Y. Then it does all the individual sides to make sure that like PR can still override PX. In our case, we only really need one of these because we're just generating like stack X and stack Y. So we're going to make this margin. Since we're doing Y first for padding, I think we should do Y first for these ones too. So we'll do margin top, margin left, and we're going to make these stack. And after that part, we're going to do the owl selector. And then we're going to grab the stack config, the stack variance. And with any luck, this will run. We might get a failure because things are in a weird order. Expected that. I wonder what the difference is between what it means when it's saying object here. Let's just console log this for a second. Can't really see the log. Is this log not actually even showing up anywhere? here. Okay, so we've got, it could be that it's nesting things weirdly, and the test helper that I wrote is too naive to handle that situation, possibly. Because if we look, like stack x2 is in its own object. So that's probably what it is. It's just this this invoke plugin thing is not dealing with like collapsing the results. So like if we were to make this an array, and then make all these objects, I bet you that's going to be a little bit closer, but that's kind of not really what we want. Well, it's not what we want. It does have the same results. Okay, so now it's just like in the wrong order. This is actually probably a better way to do it in general, because if you do things in an object, you don't have control over the order that things are going to be output in, or at least it's not as easy to assert that the order is the same. But here it is important, because in CSS, order is really important. So I think this is how we've written it. We've got y, x is going to do all those different options. So with any luck, this will pass. No? Okay, expected. Okay, so it received, did we do the x and y in the wrong order or something? What are we doing wrong? I wish I could just see the output more clearly. I do need the Laravel DD helper, because like this is not useful. Maybe we can just console log utilities 0, so that'll expand it a little bit at least. Okay, so we're getting an array with, interesting. Okay, so it's pairing them up. So it's y1, x1, y2, x2, y4, x4, y8, x8. So this is just a matter of like, just kind of like I don't have a good enough test harness really, which is annoying, but is kind of what it is. And for the purposes of this, I think we'll just move on. I'm trying to count these. So we're in the first entry in the array. So we've got an array next to responsive. And okay, so basically I need to put these into the same object. So this is kind of gross, admittedly. That we have to do it this way. Like we have to be so concerned about the specific structure of the response instead of just being able to assert that it's flat. And that's probably something that I could improve, but I think that's a job for another day. Basically what I need to do is probably write like a custom jest matcher that lets me make my assertions in like the most naive way possible, or just like using any format I want, and it can just check like, yes, like when I flatten both of these, they end up being the same. So that's no problem. We'll just do it this way for now, because this will give the right output. So if this passes, then we're good. Okay, so that passed. So just so we can see what's happening here, if we go over to the core plugins file, this is where we list all of the different plugins Tailwind should be running. So I'm going to put this plugin near the top because it is kind of like a parent level thing. And I'm going to stick it here. It's like borderline a component and not a utility. We're going to make it a utility so we can have responsive variants and stuff like that though. And yeah, so what I'm going to show you now is if we run yarn run prepare, this creates all our CDN builds. And actually, this is not going to do anything yet. But let's take a look at this file ahead of time anyways. So if we look at, so it's right after the container plugin. So if we look at dist tailwind.css and look for container, you can see here's what got generated by the container plugin. And the stack utilities should show up right here because we want them rendered between container and accessibility. And you can see here's our accessibility utilities. So it should show up there. Now the reason it doesn't show up is because we haven't configured any values for it. So if we look at default config, and if we look at like padding, you'll see like it just inherits from spacing. I think we're going to do the same thing for this. I'm just going to put it here though. Eventually I'm going to put these all in the same order. Right now they're kind of just alphabetical, I think, maybe. Are they just alphabetical? If they're just alphabetical, then I'll put it in alphabetical. Yeah, they are. So we'll just keep it in alphabetical because at least then people have a general sense of whether to scroll up or down. And now if we rebuild our Java or CSS, there we go. So now you can see it popped in all these stack utilities that use all our spacing values. So that's pretty cool. So what I do in this case is I rebuild our fixture file, and then I manually look at the diff to make sure that I didn't screw anything up. So I think it's just like yarn run rebuild fixtures. This used to be manual. It was a nightmare. I used to go into the CSS file and type all the CSS. So now if we just look at GitHub here, and so what I'll do is I'll start looking at this tailwind output file, and I'll just make sure that all that's happened is that new files or new classes were added. Nothing else changed, which means the snapshot is kind of what I would expect. And here's the same thing with the important option enabled. It looks fine. We've got the plugin here. All looks good. Now I will like run the whole test suite and make sure that that's fine. The sanity test is kind of the big one. Yeah, so this looks like it passes. We might have some errors about ESLint rules, but no, it seems fine. Okay, so that one's fine. So I'm going to create a new branch for this stuff. So we'll call this stack divide utilities. I'm trying to decide if I do them all in one PR or not. I think I will. Add stack X and stack Y utilities. So now we're going to do the same thing for the divide utilities. So this is going to be pretty boring, right? We're literally just going to duplicate this file. We're going to call this divide. Actually, we're going to have to do the divide color too. This will be fine. So I think we'll actually call this divide width, because it's basically setting the border width of the dividers, and then there's going to be a divide color that sets the border color. So we'll call this divide width. We'll import the plugin from divide width. We'll call it generating divide width utilities. We'll get this from here. We could probably just make this automatically use border width. It's hard to say. Like generally, the way that we've built everything with Tailwind is every single plugin has its own config, even if it's just based on some global thing. So like padding, it just inherits directly from spacing. But if for whatever reason you wanted to have a different padding values than you do spacing values, you can change that. So you could make the same argument here that maybe you want to have different configuration for your dividers than you do for your borders. So I think I'm going to keep it separate, and we'll just do the same thing we did for the stack, where this just inherits from spacing. Divide width will just inherit from border width, and that'll just be the end of it. So yeah, we'll just try that and see what happens. Okay, so we'll do divide width. We'll use the same values, whatever. We'll do divide width here. And these are just going to be divide. And then these are going to become border. Border top width, border left width. And then if we take our stack plugin and duplicate this to be divide width, this is going to be the same boring stuff. Divide, divide. Now this one actually we do need to look at the border width one, because you can see this has like this idea of like a default. So we should actually account for that in the test. So say we make this default is 1 pixel, then we actually want this to be the output. So let's look at border width for a second. So basically we call a generator like this. I'm going to copy this whole plugin and we'll redo this one. We actually don't need this. Divide Y. Divide X. Let's rewrite this with dashes so that when we write our assertions, we don't have to like guess about whether or not we used camel case or dash case. And we'll make sure that this is pulling from divide width. Oops, that's not the right file. Okay, and we forgot to add our owl selector. So let's do that. And just what are we missing? In the wrong order. Or I typed right instead of left. Good thing we got tests, I guess. So maybe this will pass. Not quite. I don't really see a difference here. The only thing I can see is that maybe the order is backwards. So this is actually true because in JavaScript, numeric keys always come before non-numeric keys. So this is what kind of was getting at before when I said that you have to be careful with object key order in JavaScript. So even though we've put this key first, in memory, JavaScript is putting this at the end. So to make this test pass, we're going to have to move this down here, which I don't love. Okay, but now it passes at least. Okay, So that's fine. Let's go to our core plugins again. We'll import divide width here. And then we'll go to the default config. And it's basically going to be like this, but we're going to pull from border width. Let's find where D would go. So if we look at border width, like those are all our border width values, so we can just say border width. The one thing I'm a little unsure of is if we're going to be able to just reliably pull from border color and have it just work because of this default key. I think I have an idea for that though. Okay, so let's yarn prepare. And what I actually meant to do was yarn rebuild fixtures. And while that's rebuilding, we'll just kind of wait for that, and then we should see the change pop up here. In a second. All right, so now the divide stuff got added. Seems good. So now we're going to want to do the same thing for color. So let's add divide width plugin. So let's look at like the border color. So there's a test for this. Let's look at the border color actual plugin for a second. So okay, I'm going to copy this test. We'll call this divide color. I kind of expect that in a future version of Tailwind, we might simplify the configuration file a little bit. Maybe not. But we might just start using like no separate margin and padding keys and just use spacing for everything and have everything kind of treat that as a little bit of an abstraction, but we'll see. Maybe we won't. Sometimes it feels like things are just so broken up that it's like there's almost not enough opinion in terms of how to construct your project, but all right, we'll figure it out. So let's look at this. So we're going to call this divide color, and let's look at the border color test. I'm just going to copy the exact values that were used here, and we'll just use this for our tests. So divide color, we'll pull in the divide color plugin. And let's look at the border color results. I can probably copy these. If we look at how the border color plugin is implemented, we return from pairs. So this just returns an object. So in this case, we'll be able to do this. Now this is kind of dumb because it's annoying to me that like, yeah, we have this different structure depending on how things are done, but not the end of the world. So anything that starts with dot border is going to become dot divide, and we're going to have the sal thing again. And I think I'm just going to duplicate this plugin to use for the divide color. And we'll grab divide color here, divide color here. We'll make this be divide, blah, blah, blah. Owl. Now, this is the only place I'm trying to think about. I think this is actually a reasonable way to do it. So in the border color plugin, it omits the default key for confusing reasons. But if you look at our pre-flight CSS, you can see we give every element a default border color so that you can just do like div class equals border and have like the default border show up. So with border colors, we don't actually generate a class called border-default. So I feel like it's probably wise to do the same thing for the divider color. But I'm just trying to think if there's a really strong reason to do that. The biggest argument for it is that then in our default config, we can make divide border or divide color derive from border color by default, which I think is a sensible thing to do. Because if someone adds a custom border color, they probably want that to exist in the dividers. If we just pulled directly from colors and they added a border color, but that didn't get added to divide color, that would think that that's kind of weird, probably unintuitive. So I think it's probably good that we do it this way. So we should probably include a test for this. So let's add like default, you know, orange or something. And basically we want to make sure that that doesn't actually show up here. It just gets like ignored, you know. So how far are we away from this passing? Okay, so this already passes. So if I was to go to the divide color thing and I was like omit a different key, then we should see this fail. All right, so now it fails because it did generate the divide default, which based on Tailwind's current behavior, we don't want, although I could see an argument for still generating like a border default class, even if, yeah, I don't know. I could see a pretty strong argument for this actually, because it does make things a little less weird in how they behave. Might be something for me to consider. Okay, so let's do the divide color here. And we'll go to our default config. And this is already done. So let's just do yarn run rebuild fixtures again. When this is done, we'll just double check our diff. Oh, I didn't mean to fuck with this file. Okay, discard changes to that, yarn run rebuild fixtures again. For some reason, Prettier messed up our pre-flight CSS file. So I'm not sure why that would be. But yeah, okay. So anyways, good. That's a good reason to rebuild these fixtures and always check the diffs, right? Because now I can see that, okay, only thing that got changed was the divide colors got added. There's nothing removed. There's nothing modified. So it's safe. So I feel pretty good about this now. If we just do like a run of the whole test suite. Make sure our lint rules and everything are fine. Okay, so that's good. So let's just say add divide color utilities. And just for fun, why don't we like hack around with these a little bit so you can sort of see how it works. So I'm not sure if I still have this. I used to keep an index.html file in Tailwind for me to hack on things. Looks like I don't have one right now. So let's I think it's in the git ignore though. Yeah. Because I often have a file here just for hacking on things, using like the CDN build locally. What's my... Yeah, okay, so there we go. So we'll just do a link to /dists tailwind.css. And, oh, this is missing the doc type. Hello world. And let's just live server this. All right. Oops. All right, so here's our new build. And we should be able to do some interesting stuff now. So say we have like an unordered list with like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's everything just kind of stacked together. So you give them all like a BG blue 100 or something. Let's make it more aggressive. 500 text white sort of thing, so you guys can see it more easily. So now if we want to add some space between these, we should be able to just go stack y4. Yeah, and now there's some space between them, or stack y2, and that'll be a little less space. Now say we want them all next to each other, we could go flex, stack x2, and now there's some space between them. Stack x4, yeah, this is pretty good. If we wanted to do borders between them, we would just say like divide y, like this, and maybe we do like divide blue 700, so it's like a darker blue border between them, and now we have that working. Say we just wanted to go with the gray border, but we wanted them to just be like regular items. Then we could just do something like, you know, py2 on each of these, and maybe we do like a border T, border B on the actual container, and now the whole thing is kind of wrapped. And maybe we do this all in a div where we have like some padding so we can see it all kind of spaced away from the edges. Yeah, so there's like a list now. And if we wanted to make the divider thicker, you know, we just have to do divide by, change the amount. Obviously the outer ones are different, but that's because we did those separately. But yeah, now you can sort of like declaratively construct how list stuff is done in one place. So if we just want to make these green, we can do that. If you wanted to use stack and divide together, that to me is not a super logical thing to do, because if you look here, like the divider expects that things are butted right up against each other, right? But let's just, for argument's sake, take a look at what would happen if we did use them together, just so we can see. So let's do like pink 800. So say we did like stack y4. You see what you end up with is like a top border on each one, right? So I think in this case, if you're using dividers, your mechanism for controlling the space is going to be the padding on the children. So yeah, I think this is actually pretty clean. You could see how this would be like useful in certain situations. Like, let me pull in like a view for a second, or yeah, we'll do. Let's use Alpine.js. This would be a little bit faster to set up. We'll pull in Alpine. We'll just do like an X data, and we'll say like items is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so then here what we'll do is we'll do a template tag. It's weird that Emmet doesn't autocomplete template tags. And we'll put an li in here with a x text of item, and we'll say x4 equals item in items. Okay, so actually this is interesting that this is an interesting thing that I'll have to talk to Caleb about, because if you look at what's happening here, we're getting a border on the very first item because the first item is not actually the first item because of this frickin' template tag. So that's too bad. I wonder what a good solution to that would be. Like, this is kind of like the issue with the OWL selector, right? Because it's like, oh, is it a sibling of something? And in this case, it's a sibling of the template tag. And I don't think there's like any way with just CSS alone to basically tell the browser to not consider this to be even exist. You can put the X4 directly on the UL. I feel like that's not going to work. No, that doesn't work. But that's something Caleb should maybe consider making work. Oh, if you do display well, you want the template to be display none is the problem. Let's do this with Vue instead for a second. Is there a CDN version here? Because since Vue kind of actually takes control of the DOM, it's a little bit, it's going to work more like we expect. So we'll give this like an ID of app. And we'll just say script, new Vue, L, app, data, items. Let's kind of grab these. And then we can get rid of this. And we can get rid of this X4, make it a V4, put it here. And with any luck, that should be kind of closer. So we'll do item here. Yeah, okay. So now getting rid of the stack stuff. You can see that, yeah, things are working. So the reason that I wanted to mention this is that the way that you used to have to do this before this this new feature that we just added was like kind of gross. So what I was going to mention is like we were talking about using stack and dividers together, right? Because you kind of want to be able to declaratively specify the spacing and the fact that there's dividers. And the fact that we had to put the py2 on the child might make you think, well, this is kind of crappy. Like, I have to repeat that every single time. I can't put it on the parent. That's basically like what we were doing with borders before, but it's not actually true. Because if you're in like a loop like this, you're still only declaring this in one spot and declaring this in one spot. Now, if you compare this to what you would have had to do with borders, you would have had to do this gross thing where you would have like a dynamic class binding in Vue. And you would have to say like, you'd have to get the entry in the array, and you'd have to say if I is greater than 0, then add border t, otherwise add nothing. Right? So there we get our borders. And this is the thing that was always like so annoying for people, I think, because you have like you're conditionally adding a class instead of just kind of declaratively adding everything. So it's kind of nice that instead of that, we can use the divide stuff now. So now you don't have any kind of conditional stuff ever happening. So I think that's pretty cool. So now that all the items always have the exact same classes, no matter what, no matter how many of them there are, and everything else is like controlled at the parent. This is going to be helpful for us, I think, in Tailwind UI. So Tailwind UI is this like components thing that me and Steve work on. Let's look at maybe lists. So here's like a good example, right? We have like this component, which is like an example of like a list of items. And the way that we give people these snippets is it's just you get to copy this entire example, put it in your project, kind of cut it up, do whatever you want with it, right? Which I think is generally a good workflow. But in cases where you have repeated items, it can throw people off sometimes that like this li has a border top, this li has a border top, but the very first one doesn't. So as soon as someone goes to like delete everything except the first one and throw it in a loop, they'll see that either they have an extra border or none of them have borders, because of the fact that even though this is like a data-driven UI, in our example, the items in the list have different classes, which sucks. So by being able to like refactor that to use this component that we've created now, we'll be able to update that code to specify this stuff on the parent, and then it'll be much easier for people to bring that sort of thing into their applications without having to like look for these like subtle differences between things based on whether it's the first item or any other item in the list. I'm adding this to Tailwind CSS probably today, unless someone can make a very convincing argument for why it should be done differently. One thing that we did discuss potentially was, instead of creating like a whole new set of classes, just coming up with a way to say like not first child border t, you know, because that's like a more direct mapping of what we're kind of doing. But I couldn't think of a name for this variant that I liked. The closest one I could think of was like between, but that doesn't really make sense if you're saying like between BG red 500. Like all you're doing is making all of them red except the first one, and between doesn't really make sense. You could say like children except first, but now you've got this like 30 character string at the beginning, and it's just really ugly. So I think I'm heavily leaning towards just creating new classes for these two specific use cases. That doesn't mean that we can't add something like this in the future if someone needs it for other random cases. But for me, I'm pretty sure I only ever care about the space and the borders. I don't think I ever need this for any other utility. So yeah. One thing also that's kind of interesting that's maybe worth bringing up is let me open this in Firefox. Where are you? Okay. So in Firefox, if I'm not mistaken, so say we were doing like our Flexbox version of this where we had like space x4. Sorry, stack x4. I forgot that we changed the name of this. So this is pretty cool, right? But imagine a situation where you have like px3, py2. You have these kind of like, imagine these are like little badges or something. We can even make them look more like badges. Why not, right? We'll just do like rounded full and have like these little badges, whatever. These little chips, as some people often call them. Say we put these in like a container that had like a max width. And we did like way more of these. So say we did like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so I think these are probably bleeding out of the container right now. Let's take a look. So here's our max width container. But because we don't have wrapping enabled, things are sort of bleeding out of it. Look what happens if we enable flex wrap though. So even though we've said that we want space in between them horizontally, because of the way we were forced to implement this, because of kind of limitations of CSS, it means once you wrap, you have this margin here, which is a bummer. And there is a way to solve this with CSS, but it involves negative margins and a whole lot of truly insane stuff that is just not really worth it for most situations. Like, as long as you know you don't need to wrap, this is really nice. But check out if we do like a call gap to, check this out. In Firefox, the CSS grid gap utilities work with Flexbox. Firefox is the only browser that supports this so far, but it'll be supported in Chrome soon. But we can't really use this in production until all browsers support it, right? But in the future, this is going to be the better version of these like stack X utilities. So like we could do stack X2, and that gives you this gross margin problem. But if you use call gap 2, then it's smart enough to know that when it wraps, it should not be sticking it on the edge. You can also do like row gap 2, and now you have kind of like equal space around it. Even as they like wrap onto new lines and each item is different widths than the other widths, it all kind of just like works beautifully. If we do like BG pink 200 here or something, we can kind of see there's the container. And again, like comparing that to stack X2, this gets pushed away. And even worse, if we do stack Y2, like obviously this isn't going to work, right? It like pushes everything down in this disgusting way. Compare that to just saying gap 2, and you're like living the dream. So I'm really excited for this feature to come to all browsers, because to me, this is the holy grail of doing this sort of spacing in different layouts. Once this works in Firefox and in Chrome and in Safari, I think I'll probably just use Flexbox for every single element I ever make, just so that I can do this. But that's not going to be for probably, I bet you it'll be 2 years before anyone feels comfortable actually using that in production. So in the meantime, I think being able to do this sort of thing for common use cases where things don't wrap is going to be much better than nothing. So that is all I wanted to kind of look at. I am going to put together a pull request for this, kind of go over everything in one more time and make sure I'm 100% happy with the design decisions, especially around the config naming and stuff like that. And then I will write up documentation for it and hopefully get this released this afternoon, so that we'll have a probably Tailwind 1.3 with these two new features. I think we're also adding support for inline grid, which was just a mistake that we forgot to add originally. I want to add support for group focus in addition to group hover, and that'll probably be it. I think that'll make for a pretty cool release. So thanks for checking out the stream, and yeah, see you on another one soon.